Yang Lan is chairwoman of Sun Media Group, which has other businesses in media, online, and more. I'm very pleased to have her here at this table for the first time. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you for having me.
Tell me how this started for you.
It all started exactly 20 years ago when I was graduating from college. At that time, the national television had its first open audition for college graduates for its primetime variety show called Zhenda Variety Show. That was a show to introduce sightseeing around the world to the Chinese audience, who at that time, 99% of our population didn't even have a passport. So it was a brand new exposure to the outside world when China was opening up.
Now, had you thought about that kind of career before that?
No, not at all. My major in college was English Literature and Language in Beijing Foreign Studies University. And when I was offered this opportunity, out of curiosity, I went, as well as another 1,000 girls. But after rounds of audition, I believe it's after 7 rounds of audition, I became the last one who survived it. So it gave me a really good start into broadcasting television. And the first show I hosted was a primetime nationwide show which had the audience of 200 million every week. I did it for 4 years. That really gave me a pretty good start in a career.
It's stunning to hear those numbers
I know.
From an American television perspective. I once did an interview with the Minister of Culture from China here it was in Washington, where they had a Chinese festival at the Kennedy Center. And so they asked me, could they rebroadcast it in China? And I said, of course, the interview. They said, you'll probably reach 300 million people, which is more people than have seen anything I've ever done in my entire life.
But we have 1.3 billion.
So then you began to...
And then I quit my job to come to the States for postgraduate studies at Columbia University of New York, where I studied international affairs. And upon graduation, I went back to Hong Kong to join Phoenix TV, the Mandarin channel of Star TV network, and I started to produce my own show, Yang Lan 101, which was the first ever in-depth one-on-one interview show on Chinese television. I've been doing that for plus the days in Phoenix television, 12 years. So over this time, I have interviewed more than 600 movers and shapers around the world, and many of them have been your guests too.
Indeed. Where does the entrepreneurial spirit that you have come from? The fact that you have not just had a career, but you also have engaged in creating businesses and enterprises along with your husband.
Well, that was 10 years ago, the year of 2000. We co-founded Sun TV, which was the first satellite documentary channel for the Greater China area. Well, because at that time I was so obsessed with documentaries. I think they have lasting values, give in-depth look into culture and history and people. But then that business had a flop in 4 years' time because the business model was not sustainable. The fact was we were positioned in Hong Kong, but then we have limited landing rights into the mainland, which didn't give it enough, advertising revenue basis.
I think Rupert Murdoch at once was invested in Phoenix Television, was he not?
Yes, I think he's still part of the shareholders. So we sold the channel, and then we start to build multimedia integration into different aspects of the media, television, websites, and then big events, and so on and so forth. So
now, is there a website now that reflects the broadest understanding of who you are and what you're about, and that might even carry a blog from you?
Well, I have a blog in several leading portals in China and also Twitter. Our social community for Her Village, for example, is around 3 to 4 million followers. And our website is mostly in Mandarin. It's called tianyu.com, which is the Chinese spelling of Her Village. That's targeted at urban women.
Where is it that you think this remarkable career is headed?
I don't know. I think there are so many exciting opportunities in China. The media is also opening up. So there are all sorts of things that you want to do, and if you don't have existing platforms to help you to do that, you try to create something for yourself. I think that's where the entrepreneurship comes from. And for me, it's about, I think we have come into an age in which not a singular platform can complete the communication job, so it's more integrated media communication into your targeted audience. And for me, serving the urban women audience is one of my goals.
Was there just a natural instinct for business that was there, dormant in China, waiting for it to open and waiting for their opportunity to create things?
I believe so. It has been suppressed for decades, and then suddenly when things opens up, everyone wants to try his luck. So there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in the air, especially among young people who want to try their luck and above all, try to realize their dreams, their aspirations. So I think, your imagination is your limit.
Jack Ma was here the other day. Someone I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
And what he has created, a kind of Amazon-like empire, is extraordinary.
Yeah, and it's the age for younger people to create their own empires. And for me, it's not about building empires, but it's about something I really enjoy doing, and sometimes I think I'm good at it.
You're obviously good at it.
So trying something new, and not just asking the question, why do you want to do it, but the question, why not?
Exactly.
Is my mentality.
Talk to us about the cultural changes and changes in fashion, in cinema, in a sense the lifestyle in the urban areas. The
following 2 decades would possibly witness a renaissance of all kinds in China, from arts to to cinema to documentaries to fashion to whatever. But also we found it is restoration of value into a society where people got disillusioned from certain ideology before, but then there was a
the Cultural Revolution and other.
Yeah, but then there's materialism. There was a dating show in which when the boy asked the girl, "Do you want to sit on the back seat of my bicycle and we both have fun?" The girl said, "I would rather cry at the back seat of a BMW," and which aroused huge controversy in society, suggesting materialism is overruling the value system of the younger generation. But then there's a big outcry in the society saying that, what's wrong with us? Is it the materialism? Is the material success the only goal for our generation, or is there something more valuable, more lasting that we are seeking? So I think for the next 2 decades, it's not just the renaissance of arts and fashion, of creativity, but also it's about the reinventing of our value system. And building up civil society is a part of that. Last week, my foundation, Sun Culture Foundation, co-organized an event with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which enabled
Is this while Bill and Warren and Melinda were
meeting
looking for
Chinese billionaires? But it's not just about giving pledge. It's about equal exchange of ideas, of philanthropy. I also invited the Minister of Civil Affairs to be a partner, from which he also wrote a blog saying that he got so many feedbacks from future philanthropists, and saying that first of all we need legislation for philanthropy, and also we need capacity building for our NPOs and NGOs.
Will the new generation of leadership, say young men and women in their early 30s now and early 40s, how are they different from the generation that they will succeed?
They have got very decent education, college education for many of them, and then they have the exposure through the internet and other media to the world, and many of them can afford international travels these days, and you see the booming of tourism both at home and abroad. So this generation does not only think about themselves with the limitation of geographic boundaries, but rather they can think across the borders. You know, the entrepreneurs are investing in other countries, and the younger people they are seeking education here or in Europe and elsewhere. So there's not a, I think less limit in terms of what they can do, what they can achieve.
Most of us know about Beijing and Shanghai and Hong Kong and a few other huge cities. Tell us about China beyond that.
In China, there's a huge disparity from east to west, and from major cities to second-tier, third-tier cities. But there is a massive process of urbanization which is taking place now.
People coming from the rural areas to the city.
Over the past 2 decades, more than 200 million rural population have been urbanized. For the next 2 decades, another 300 million are coming into cities.
And what does that mean for China, that they're coming in? Are they finding jobs? Are they finding opportunity?
They are finding jobs, they are finding opportunities, but also public policy needs to be adjusted to suit the needs of them and their children. For example, how should the local cities provide medical services, education, housing to these migrant workers? Should they be treated equally as city residents, and so on and so forth? So a lot of experiments is going on. In China, there are more than 300 cities with population beyond 1 million.
That's the point. Yes, 300 cities with a population more than 1 million.
More than 1 million. And if you visit second or third tier cities nowadays in China, massive construction, but also more sophisticated city planning. You see hundreds and thousands of new theaters being built, and museums and parks and so on and so forth. And the high-speed train will soon connect the whole country and raise it to another level of communication and transportation. So you will see the speeding up of communication and also the spread of information. I don't know what the country is heading for, but I think it's heading for a more open society.
It's heading for the largest economy in the world, for sure.
I think it's also heading for a more open society, and also for young people more opportunities.
Why doesn't that take place faster?
Instability is a big issue. If you have 300 million people migrating, if you see it, you will be astonished that every year during Chinese New Year, there will be 200 million people coming back home to their rural residence, and that is the migration of a huge population there. And also there's disparity of income between the urban and rural areas. And young college graduates would be overwhelmed by the rising of real estate prices in major metropolitan cities.
Well, the commercial real estate, there's some fear of a bubble taking place.
Yeah, so you have all sorts of concerns and worries, and I think keeping the society together is a huge challenge and a task. Believe it or not, well, as a media professional, I think sometimes the speed is a little bit too fast. For example, the usage of land. Probably we are overusing it, and we have used the land reserve that should have been used for the next generations. But we have developed so many things on the piece of ground. The architecture, for example, there are some very bad pieces will be taken apart sooner or later. So what a waste of the environment, the resources, and the money into it. So I think the society is opening up and keeps opening up.
So what do you worry about for your country?
What I worry about? Well, I worry about how do you keep pace with this development, with this construction, without the younger generation losing opportunities. Well, nowadays, because, for example, I did interviews with so-called tribe of ants, which is used to describe the new college graduates. Right. With the income of $500 a month, they cannot afford a piece of apartment or a home within 10 years or 20 years of employment, and they're losing their hope. So how can the society provide young people with opportunities to succeed?
Only if they maintain the kind of growth rate that they've had.
But also they have to maintain a reasonable real estate price for the majority of the population.
And how do they do that?
I really don't have a solution for that, but I think that's a concern for me.
For a long time, young Chinese have gone to American universities, to British universities, and many of them have stayed and some have come back. So you have people now in their 40s and 50s with graduate education outside of China, and they're being asked to come back, and take part. And the appeal is out of national pride. Do you see much of that in terms of people who left China, were in the United States, were in England, were in other places, Russia, who are deciding to come back to China to participate in this extraordinary transformation that's taking place?
I think national pride is one thing, opportunity and a chance to realize your dream is another. I think it's a more decisive element. For example,
the opportunity is a more decisive element than pride.
I think so. I think so. For ordinary people. For example, architect here can aspire to build one major building in Manhattan, but how many opportunities can be offered to him? But in China, you have, the dozens, hundreds of cities, designing their landmarks.
Most great architects I know around the world are working in China.
It's a huge test land of all sorts of styles and creativity. And of course, young people like to go back and to seek their success or have their name made, and also young business people, when they stayed here in the U.S., they see all sorts of services which is still unavailable in China. They can go back home and start a training center, a school, a kindergarten. They can start anything using the references that they learned here or in Europe or anywhere else in the world. And when back home, they can start something from scratch and get successful in a few years' time. So I think that temptation is even greater than the national pride. But of course, national pride is one element, of course.
How fast is the middle class rising? Because many look at it as an important element of China's growth, to find markets internally as well as serving markets externally.
Well, I think the middle class is growing very fast. I don't have a specific number that I can give you. It also depends on how would you define a middle class person.
Yes.
A regular job.
How would you define middle class in China?
Well, I would say a rented home or a bought home, and then a regular job. Career promotions in sight, and raising children and having a car, that could be some of the symbols. But if you think about the rise of car sales in China, I think that would be one of the symbols of the rising middle class. Last year, 10 million new cars were sold in China.
It is becoming the first or the second largest market for every.
Yeah, I think that could be one symbols of the rising of middle class in China.
When we look at the economics of China, when we look at the politics of China, when we look at the change of China, there always is the question of freedom of expression. We all know about the Google controversy that took place. How would you characterize freedom of expression today in China?
There are still regulations, censorship, frustrations, that's for sure. But I also see progress, especially through the introduction of internet. It has become a big public arena, that more people will express their opinions towards public policies, pros and cons. And there have been many cases when abuses of power were reported on the internet, and a huge public outcry would drive the government to be more spontaneous, and to be more transparent, and also it directly led to the change of regulations or practices by the government. I think that's the progress we have made.
And human rights?
Well, taking the example of people in custody or people in prison, there were cases reported through the internet that they were mistreated, and then related personnels were punished, investigations were initiated, and regulations have been reshaped. I think those are progresses that we can see. But of course, in such a vast country, you see a lot of issues and problems pumping out every day. In a lot of places. I think right now the major concern is about land usage. People are worried about proper compensation for their land, which is taken away for urbanization or development. So what is proper compensation? Sometimes the government and the residents may have different perspectives, and there's a lot of arguments on that issue, and that's what we see as a lot of incidents coming up.
How do most Chinese that your friends and colleagues, view the United States today?
Wow, that's a big question. I think people look up to the U.S. as it is a free and open society. It's leading, it's leading in education, in culture, in world politics, and so on and so forth. But I think many Chinese disagree on some of the international policies that the U.S. government holds, especially the Iraq wars, and so on and so forth.
But some agreement on North Korea and some effort to cooperate on North Korea and some places like that.
Yeah, there's cooperation between U.S. and China on a lot of fronts.
How do you think China? I realize that you do television programs and entrepreneurial activities and own newspapers, and you're not a part of the government. But how do you think China sees its role in the world over the next 25 years?
Well, I think China will take on more responsibilities in terms of free trade, in terms of the environmental protections. It's not just for the sake of the outside world, it's for our own people. We can't live in a polluted piece of land with our health threatened. But it also, I think, from an internal perspective, we see more problems than outsiders can see. We see, hundreds of millions of workers, who are migrant workers, whose jobs may at stake if foreign currency changes just a little bit, because the margin for the manufacturing industry is very low.
So you're suggesting that China's resistance to changing and appreciating the currency was in part because it would affect the wages of workers in China?
Not just the wages, it's just the security of jobs.
Job security per se.
It could affect millions and tens of millions of jobs. I'm not arguing on the government's point of view. I'm just saying that as an insider, we see more internal challenges than outsiders can see.
Well, Americans make arguments the same way, that in fact you need to impose tariffs because you need to protect American workers. I mean, that's
so. I
other
think
countries do the same thing.
It's a balancing
of both. The idea to try to protect jobs is an important imperative for officials all over the world. Is my point. Yeah. So, how do you most hope China will grow? What is it? What's your own great ambition for this place that has gone, and you have played such an important, in a sense, cultural and media role in reflecting its change?
Well, for me, I think bridging China and the outside world is part of what I can do. Serving as the ambassador for Beijing Olympics and Shanghai Expo could be part of that. So that part includes explaining to the world what is going on in China, as well as explaining to my audience what's going on around the world. You know, it's interesting that my first show on television was about introducing the sceneries around the world, histories and geographies into for my audience. But later on, it's about introducing people, personalities, insights, perspectives to my audience, which is more in depth, I hope. And that is something that I take great pride in. And another thing I want to do is to help to enhance the growth of the civil society in China. I think
by that you mean creating institutions, courts, and
well, the NPOs and the NGOs. Right. Well, my foundation has been working with the leading educational institutions like Harvard University, Columbia University, Peking University, and Tsinghua University to offer workshops for the training of top executives of nonprofit organizations in China. So I think that capacity building for the civil society will mean a lot of future for our society.
Finally, what brings you to New York?
Well, this time I was invited to attend Fortune magazine's The Most Powerful Women conference in Washington.
Yes.
And it's always sweet to come back to New York. I lived here for 3 years, right, and Columbia, so visiting some of my old friends and would mean a lot. And coming back to the city in a sunny day, have a feel of the Central Park, and then walk on Madison, Avenue and 57th, and get the feel of the city also mean a lot of things to me. This is a city I love. I had my postgraduate studies. I was married, and my first child was born here in this city. So I have a personal and emotional attachment to the city itself.
We're glad to see you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you very much
for coming.
We look forward to visiting